So let's start with these awardees. I'm super excited to announce them. We'll start with the Founders Contemporary Design Award, which goes to Grant Akiyama for blue and white cylinder. Congratulations. The Regional Identity Award goes to Jim Weaver for redlining, urban renewal, interstate highways. There's more. A new art museum where important community, housing, and children generally were not. The Craftsmanship Award goes to Ryan Kepler for optic bottle pair. The Art and Craft Dialogue Award goes to Mark Lewis for An Ordinary Day. And the Innovation Award, and I hope I pronounce her last name correctly, Ann Yancha for Repeat Quilt, which is behind me. So, congratulations to everyone. I think I'll just start with the fact that I am a Tulsan, born and bred. I was born and raised here in Tulsa, graduate of Edison High School, and my parents still live here. So this was a treat to be able to come back and do this, and thank you for having this the week after Thanksgiving. That all worked out really nicely. So I've been in Seattle now, working at Pilchuck for the last 3 years. I was just saying that my career has kind of taken me all over the country, and that's been a lot of fun. But my roots are here in Tulsa. It's where it all started. If some of you know, my dad is Jim Davies from Davies and Associates on Cherry Street, longtime graphic design firm. So I've been part of that Tulsa art community for a long time, and I feel like that's kind of where it all started for me, certainly. And I went to KU for undergrad, art history, back to OU for art history and MA, and my background is in crafts. I really started out starting to talk about, but for me, my mother's from South Korea, but she and my dad collected Navajo textiles and Pueblo pottery, and so we constantly had this dialogue in the house about, form and iconography and materials and the similarities between, so that my graduate work really kind of focused on that, or did. And then I found the work of Tony Jajola, who is Isleta Pueblo, which led me on this path in the mid-90s about glass, which there were no books about glass, so I got on a plane and went to Seattle and spent time with a young artist who Tony introduced me to named Preston Singletary, who then, went like this, which was amazing, and is a current board member of mine and a friend, and Marvin Oliver, who is sadly gone now, but it was Quinault Isleta Pueblo. So I was really still exploring that juxtaposition of indigenous and contemporary glass, and so that formed my thesis work. It's always, craft is in my blood and always will be. So I thought we could start walking through about and talking about the work, and I won't talk about all the pieces unless you want me to, and stop me at any time if you want me to start to talk about a specific piece, but I thought we would just sort of start in the middle here and start with Ann Yancha's piece behind me. To me, I think one of the things that really excites me about materials and craft in this day and age especially is the exploration and really pushing the boundaries of materials. And so this felt just very innovative. I did jury this work all online, so it was like seeing it in person. I couldn't wait to see it in person, and this one was so exciting. I mean, there's the sound quality when you hit the foot pedal, but to me, I've also always had an interest before I shifted my graduate work into contemporary indigenous glass. I really was fascinated by earthworks, and this felt akin to that in some way because of the site specific. There's, I think, some site-specific soil happening here, site-specific plants. So I just found this, the marksmanship and the exploration of that juxtaposition of ideas in this piece really fascinating, and part of why I gave her that Innovation Award. This piece by Catherine Hare just literally made me smile. I think, again, speaking to my interest, my longtime interest in earthworks, there's something that just sort of sparked that interest for me because of the site-specific soil that's used. It is wax, but I loved the playfulness of it, and just something about it felt very accessible, which I always try to look for in work, because I think you just everybody needs an access point, and turtles make everyone smile. So that one was very sort of simplistic for me. There's nothing sort of deeper about this one, but I love how she's really, playing with the forms, and it's very, it's very creative and explorative. Catherine Weaver's work, I think one of the things that I also really like about, the intersection of craft that's happening is when, I think sometimes you say the word craft, and craft, of course, for a while was a dirty word, which was super sad. And I love that we're just embracing it. It's craft, and that craft doesn't always have to be an object, and it doesn't have to be utilitarian, and it can be that mixture of materials. And so I loved the texture and the three-dimensionality of this piece. It's a painting, yes, but there's something that really causes you to explore, obviously, the use of the fabric and the lace, and I loved just the undulating quality and the fact that it had a lot of movement to it. So that piece I loved, just that. I've always loved, with painting, I love impasto, and that sort of said something about that technique to me. The Janet Shipley Hawkes piece was just so dynamic when I saw this. And obviously the level of detail is, when you get a chance to come up and take a look at it and really see the level of detail, I just thought that was so striking, and the gradation of color here that's quite subtle but very dynamic and rich. The Ruby Troop piece, I felt was I love the texture that's happening, and the fact that there's so much three-dimensionality. I love when pieces sort of like come at you, and that it really kind of forces you to come in. Every time I come up to this piece, it's like I want to just go into it, and so I just found that to be so exciting and dynamic. One of the things that I really like about when I look at work is if there's a narrative, and sometimes they're very in your face, and sometimes they're not. And this piece obviously said a lot politically, and I thought it was just so important to capture it. As an art historian, all work captures what's happening in this day and age, and so that piece really, to me, was so important to have in this exhibition. As well as just being, sculpturally, just a really dynamic piece. Again, as an art historian, I couldn't say no to this piece that is a nod to the Marshal Duchamp, but the fact that it uses the shredded currency from the U.S. Treasury was just so incredible to me in reading what Chris had said about the work. And I'm sorry that I don't live here and I don't know everybody yet, but hopefully I'll meet all of the artists. But I just found this to be this juxtaposition of its hedgehog and horse to be so dynamic that conversation that comes out of that is so incredible. On the back wall, you've got, and we'll kind of we'll leave the watercolor and the painting there off, but kind of focus on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces there in the center. I have always been drawn to fiber work, and I think just the intricacy of detail. I also, during COVID, really focused on doing embroidery myself, and one of my best friends and I would send embroidery to one another and find threads, and then we would get on Zoom and do embroidery together. I've taken classes on it before, and I have such an appreciation for it because it is so incredibly difficult. But I think, the thing that makes you really stop and consider is, like the iris piece by Irmgard Gould. When I first saw it online, I thought, oh, it's another, watercolor in the exhibition at first glance, until I saw the details and saw that she was using embroidery, which was so incredibly impressive to me because of the subtle three-dimensionality that's happening and the gradation of color, and it has so much depth. And then the piece below it too. I mean, to me, embroidery reads a lot like sculpture for me because of the different ways that you can use the threads. So that leads us to the next piece on the right by Sarah Roble, which is incredibly sculptural to me and three-dimensional because of the depth and also just the fact that she is embroidering through paper. So that I thought was just incredibly dynamic, and the juxtaposition of the three. The piece here next to it by Taylor Painter Wolfe is just, I love the play on looking like it's a buffalo hide hanging, but it's so painterly, and the way that, I believe Taylor's a woman, correct? Am I right? Thank you. The way she is using the colors and the felts in such a painterly way in that application is so exciting. There was a group that I gave a talk to earlier today from Women in Recovery, which was fantastic. It was 29 women. And, I was saying to them, just there's no right or wrong answer. Just look at the work and just feel safe in that it's what you see. And they did see a buffalo hide, and they also saw it as being topography, which I saw as well. It's very powerful. The piece next to that, I guess I am going to talk about every piece, which is Yuli Urano, and I'm sorry if I am mispronouncing anyone's name. Please stop me. Again, embroidery, but the fact that she's incorporated her hair and that personal element that's, there's that investment of the piece. I mean, you literally see the artist's hand in all pieces, and I think that's what strikes me the most in craft and materiality. But the fact that this literally incorporates her hair. There's another piece in the exhibition that also incorporates hair, but I think that personal touch is so compelling. These are the only technically two-dimensional pieces in the exhibition. The Laurel Payne the watercolor by Laurel Payne was obviously just such a strong piece, watercolor being such a difficult medium. But the fact that this poem that's woven throughout was incredibly strong. And I thought the piece below it by Kristen Peace was it made me smile. And again, one of those pieces that I think is so important. And I thought, as 108 Contemporary is a downtown open to the public space, I thought it was important for people to be able to recognize something and that felt very accessible. The piece by Pamela Husky, having lived in northern New Mexico, this piece obviously spoke to me very much. And the fact that it is so incredibly three-dimensional and there's so much depth. Feel free, I did wear perfume and deodorant to come on down, and I don't bite. But this piece I just thought was so incredible, the way there was so much depth to the piece and the way she's used different forms in order to create that sense of depth. And I, especially when you look at crafts and various materials, there are a lot of women in the exhibition, and women are tied to a lot of the crafts, and especially with quilt making and textiles. So I loved this piece by Irene, and to me there was a slight implied narrative because of the detail and a lot of the imagery. And I really, when you have a chance, come up and take a look at you have to stand back and then really come up close to the piece so that you can see that level of detail that is in the textile. But then also standing back, just the iconography that works together, which is really fantastic. This piece by Cassidy Fry struck me because I think, in all my years running the SOFA art fairs, and if you're not familiar with SOFA, that stands for Sculpture, Objects, Functional Art. So it really speaks to the craft movement, right? So that fair was started by Mark Lyman in 1980, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember exactly which year, but, Mark knew that there was a a fair that was needed for galleries who showed the applied arts, and for artists who did work and who didn't have a space. At that time, art fairs, there were not 30 art fairs in Miami the way there are now. So to me, this was just, it made me think about the origins of sofa and sculpture and function, but purely just building on these materials and but not being functional, but just literally being a use of those materials in a really innovative way. Grant Akiyama, your work. Yeah, I think one of the things I really love about your work is that it really is about the material. I think if you're a craftsperson and you're embedded in the crafts, it's like you just love materials. And I mean, this is just straight on, raw, that love of raw material. But yet there's this polish to it, I feel, because they are very painterly. And that juxtaposition of raw and polish with this piece. But really, I think, looking inside them, it, is a lovely little sort of surprise. So love these pieces. The piece, C.J. Wells, ceramic, small, I think, is always difficult to do. People think, oh, large is hard. And yes, large is hard. And Mark Lewis, and when I walked in, he said this piece, well, we'll talk about it. I won't give that away yet. But small is difficult. And I think, to get scale and proportion in a small form is, that's an achievement, a technical achievement. So I just loved this, but I loved that it was just slightly tweaked a little bit, and so it has a bit of personality. And it also just spoke to me personally. Once we sort of came out of lockdown in Seattle, I got together with some of my girlfriends, and I just always knew that I wanted to work in clay and I wanted to throw. And so I did, and I'm better at that than I am glass blowing, but yeah, so I just found that to be, I know the difficulty it is in making a piece and getting it right. Let's see, well, I'll go to Mark's piece next. So this piece, I was so excited to see because, I mean, it's just when I was looking at it online, which again, is just so hard with crafts and material-based work, but the scale of it was just really inspiring. Much like working on a small scale, working on a large scale can be quite difficult. And Mark was saying that he'd been working on this piece for 2 years, and this is the first time it's being exhibited. So I'm happy that occurred. But this piece is, it's obviously very much reflective of any day, every day, current day, what's happening. A lot of social commentary here, but some lifts, some things that to look forward to, but some very real topics that are being addressed. But I also love the sense of scale, with the clothing that's been applied. But the layers of it, I think, speak to the layers that happen in real life and what we're all addressing on an everyday basis. You could be walking down the street in your own head and not realize, the various things that are happening, and I think that's so reflected in this piece. And I really appreciate just the level of craftsmanship that went into this piece over 2 years. But you notice something different every time. Every time I walk by this piece, I'm like, how did I miss that? But it's just absolutely incredible and painterly and three-dimensional and quite heavy. When I got here on Monday, Mark was hanging this with the preparator, and so Jen and I stepped in to help, and yeah, it's heavy. This piece by Lillian Fitzpatrick is, I just love, again, the juxtaposition of the really delicate porcelain on these thin wires, on this very stable, wood being very synonymous with strength and stable foundation, but these lovely little porcelain forms that, I don't know what they signify, but to me they're like little people that are living in this little village, and I just thought this was such a precious piece, and I just love that juxtaposition of materials. This piece by Elaine Emmons I thought was really important to include, again, a lot of work by women in this exhibition. And another piece about women's rights and what's going on, I thought it was incredibly important to address that, and so thankful that she did. And would you like to talk about your piece? No, okay. But it was, I will say, it was really fascinating with the women in recovery. They really responded very much to this piece, and really, I think it was very, very personal for them. But I love the accessibility of it, that it is an umbrella, a vinyl ball. It looks like a beach ball, but it really invites you in and to explore it a little bit more. Kayla Ulmer. So there were 3 pieces submitted, and I felt like I had to take all 3 because I kept looking at one and I thought, well, I can't choose one. And then they sort of became the 3 wise men to me when I looked at them, and I felt like they just had to be a grouping together. These are incredible. Casting glass is very difficult. You have to make the mold in casting the glass, and I always appreciate someone who casts glass. As a former glass dealer, and obviously somebody who works at a glass school, glass can be incredibly difficult and finicky when you cast it because it's such mass and volume that cooling it takes much longer. It's always a tricky process when you're annealing, which is to gradually cool the glass. But when you're casting it, it's even more difficult. But I love that they are 3-dimensional forms, but they take on a bit more 3-dimensionality with that gilded mirror behind. So I loved that play. And then I have not turned wood myself, but I've represented a number of wood artists, and I always had wood turners at the Sofa Art Fair, and just watching the amount of work that goes into that. And Ron Fleming was a family friend of ours, and I always stayed in touch with Ron. So I'm always have an affinity for the wood artists because the beauty of the grain and the detail that they can get, but the fact that they use the knots and the burls almost as, they're very 3-dimensional and they become forms in and of themselves in the piece is always really special to me. This piece by Kim Eichler, Mesmer, was, to me, just kind of jumped out because it felt so sculptural. Because of the different, the way she had used the different threads and the colors, it just had this constructivist, I mean, again, like the boring art historian in me, but it just had this like very constructivist feeling to me that just felt 3-dimensional. And I love that because it really invites you up and to really explore it and all of the different threads that are running throughout it. Raku, I've always been a big fan of Raku. So this piece by Linda Stilley with the gold leaf, just as beautiful sculptural form, and you have to appreciate the delicacy of working in Raku. This piece by Jean Ann Falser, who I was fortunate to meet last night. Again, as a play on women's bodies, and the layers of it were so fascinating to me, being a woman and, the exterior of it. And we were having this conversation with the women in recovery, and they really responded to this piece as well. But the fact that, on the outside as a woman, it's like, oh, I've got to put on my lipstick and I've got to look pretty and I've got to have this facade. But on the inside, I'm really raw and I've got these layers, and we're really all made of the same thing, which is, cells and DNA and tissue. And that it had that feeling for me, but I just love the materiality of it as well. This is the other piece by Terry Higgs. That incorporates her hair in the piece, and I really just found it to be so striking. Obviously, the fragility of this handmade kozo paper, and there's painted silk and silk roving, but or maybe no, it doesn't have hair. It's the silk roving. Yeah, not hair. And so that to me was just such a powerful piece, that juxtaposition with the fragility of the paper, but with this very, powerful symbolism in the center of it, which I felt just, was very powerful. And again, as I think I was saying before, working on a small scale, I think can be very difficult. And so I always appreciate the studio jewelers, because of the work that goes into making something quite small. And so I've always appreciated studio jewelry, and this piece by Joseph Jenner is quite exceptional in the fact that it really draws you in the talisman. The pieces by Jim Weaver here, I think, spoke to the narrative that is always of interest to me, that are woven throughout pieces. To me, when I first saw this piece, it reminded me a lot of Tulsa and the things that have occurred in our city. But it also had this feeling of as an art historian, the idea of, the museum it's on the hill and it's inaccessible, and why does there have to be this hierarchy? But I love the fact that he's using leather in this way, which you don't really see that much, right? And so that was really surprising to me, and really I love the way he's using it in a really strong narrative as well. I do work at Pilchuck Glass School, so I had to, of course, have some more glass, but these pieces by Ryan Kepler were beautiful, obviously, but I love the fact that they're solid optic forms, and so they really kind of pull you in, and they're doing a little bit of an optical illusion with you, because they're not blown, and I think so many people just assume with glass that it's blown, and these are solid forms. Beautiful. There's a purity to them, which I think is so, when you just get to the simplicity of color and form, you can't go wrong. So absolutely loved these two pieces by Ryan, and the fact that it is quite difficult to work with solid glass. And then Catherine Thomas, again, another piece, speaking, I think, to women's rights. To me, that's how I interpreted it, and this feeling of, feeling constrained. I just loved the texture of it, and the fact that she's really, embracing the material, and it feels quite raw, and she's not glazing it or putting too much, adornment on it, but it felt very powerful, and obviously it's in its pose and its material. Cristiano Prado, I loved the delicacy, again, working small, and I think it really, it begs you to come up and really look at the detail of it, and the juxtaposition of, the glazes is really exciting to me. So I thought that piece was, again, quite special. So I will just end by saying thank you all so much. This was a pleasure to jury this exhibition. I'll be here if you have any questions and want to talk about the pieces. But yes, please buy art, support the artists. Everything is for sale. And thank you for coming.